All right, everyone, it's time to talk about Brazilian politics because what we see there is a very, very strange situation. It almost echoes what we saw maybe in Austria. Of course, you remember it was basically van der Bellen versus Hofer. It was essentially the head of a socialism party, the Green movement there, sort of almost marginally communistic, which won by a small margin and after voting fraud almost certainly helped, versus Hofer, who represented a Teutonic party, or what had been a strictly ethno-nationalistic, right-wing, traditionalistic movement. Now maybe more tempered than that, of course, a mainstream party, but that's what it boiled down to. The only people in the end, that were still standing were far left and what we would consider far right, generally, by certainly the European standards. In Brazil, we're seeing the same situation, it appears, rise up because they're sort of lamestream, outdated candidate is serving now 12 years in prison for some sort of a corruption scandal, which leaves several people to actually duke it out. The number one place candidate is apparently leading the Green movement, again, roughly equitable to what we saw in Austria. And then you have a man called Bolsonaro, who represents what they consider a far-right movement in Brazil. Now, Brazilian far-right, it appears, is a little bit different than what it is typically associated with here. Here, the far-right typically is associated with right-wing economics first and foremost. Only recently, with the surging of the new right, have you seen other sort of more moralistic right-wing material get put into what would otherwise be mainstream but far-right economic platforms. Before that, really, the evangelicals, maybe from the United States, would have been semi-separate almost. It was a different breed of conservative that they ranged from left to right-wing on economic issues. They just happened to be moralistic. With Bolsonaro, the thing that people are saying is, he might end up getting fined, by the way, for this. He apparently talked badly about the indigenous communities of Brazil, saying, well, it's like a regrettable area. People aren't doing anything. They're just sort of, squatting on this land, and who cares? He is obviously maybe what we would consider one of the more urban Brazilians in that sense, talking about other communities there. For instance, the sort of Afro-Brazilian community, as opposed to Brazilian, civic nationalism at large under a national banner, specifically some of these subgroups. Bolsonaro is therefore rocking the boat by haranguing people on what would equate to a marginally ethnic basis. Although it's kind of complex, if you studied anthropology, you probably learned a little bit about the sort of social structure of Brazil and how it's actually vastly different in many ways from, where you said the racial system originally employed there valued purity of blood regardless of race over mixture, whatever that mixture was. Whereas in some ethnic circles, if we think of maybe the Nazi Party or something, we have a system where certain mixes would be above even someone who's purebred, depending on what sort of ethnic group they belong to. It's a different categorization system, so it can get a little bit difficult for anyone, I guess, outside of Brazil, or maybe Portugal in some ways. Anyone outside of that region probably can't fully comprehend the reasoning behind some parts of Brazilian culture. But we have the same basic political situation there that we've had in multiple places in Europe. See, the revolution is not being televised, though, in this case, because we're not hearing much about it. Because people on maybe the new right, the alt-right, whatever, here or in Europe, they don't really care about Brazil. They consider Brazil to be in fact, Brazil is frequently invoked as what they're seeking to avoid, that kind of social and ethnic and I guess economic in many ways structure. Although some of them are further left than the Green Party of Brazil, certainly. I mean, think of some of these people. They're basically, it's basically going to be communal. It's just going to be white, So we're going to be communists, but it's going to be ethno-communism, basically. It's basically what they're arguing for. Which, by the way, I completely oppose. I think that's a shitty idea at best. But it is interesting because Latin America is not typically associated with having a right wing at all. It's like people were talking about, you look at the opposition of Venezuela. These aren't hyper-capitalistic. These aren't ANCAPs that are trying to unseat Maduro. These are essentially other socialists who simply say that Maduro is too abusive a socialist and too inept to manage what they want to maintain, which is still largely a socialist economy. Most of the people in Venezuela who oppose Maduro are fundamentally socialistic, but the vast majority of Venezuelans are socialists. The vast majority of Venezuelans also oppose Maduro. Draw a Venn diagram and see what that actually says about the nation. It's not being overthrown by a far right. He invokes that because people in Latin America typically hate the right wing. They look at Chile, they look at Pinochet, and they say, well, that was a terrible time. It's so much better when Maduro purges people than somebody on the right throwing them out of helicopters and forming an almost first world economy. You look at Latin America, there's not really a right wing there. The concept of capitalism didn't really penetrate into Latin America very easily. There are enclaves of people. I know that Brazil has a resurgent libertarian movement at this point, which, by the way, would be the greatest thing. Look, when what's her name there, Dilma or whatever, who's a socialist, gets kicked out of office, the people who replaced her were only marginally more free market than she was. It was essentially in Latin America, when you have the ousting of an establishment party, it's over some separate corruption scandal. It's over they embezzled money. The nepotism, a rape gang, or talking to cartel leaders and taking money from bribes from a cartel or something. That's why someone gets unseated. It's not they get unseated by someone who says, hey, we want a more free market within this nation. It's interesting. It'll be interesting to see, I guess, how this plays out, because the old-style candidate, the sort of establishment candidate's in prison. The second place candidate right now, who represents an actual right wing within Brazil, might go to jail or get fined, leaving essentially the Green Party, something further left than what they've had, which would, by the way, destroy Brazil. My recommendation is, Brazilians should probably back Bolsonaro. Maybe references to homosexuality or ethnicity aside, it's really about the economic structure at some point, more than anything else within the society. You can't have, if your worry is, well, this person their rhetoric is mean or distasteful, offensive or something. You're worried about that probably because at the larger level you want social cohesion, you want stability, you don't want people killed, you don't want people harassed and stuff. You want a stable, polite, happy, prosperous society. Where is that in Brazil? Now, that's the result of economic situation. It has nothing to do with somebody saying something offensive. This is what people need to understand all over the world. That is that people who are unorthodox, they're political outsiders in the way they behave, their upbringing or whatever, they're not a threat to these societies. It's like when people say, well, this new political movement might be violent, but they ignore 150 years of violence, like here in the United States. Every war we've been involved in, every misstep by government, every bit of corruption in D.C. has been the result of two parties for the last 150 years within our society. The Democrats and the Republicans, between the two of them, all ills have come that have ever come from D.C. Yet other groups that are not part of that, libertarians though, are scary. A group that never started war. The Green Party is scary. The Sanders neo-progressivism that's, outside of the Democratic core, or populism a la Trump, those are scary or potentially harmful to the country. Let's just keep electing the people that keep getting us involved in wars because we can't possibly improve upon this system. That really becomes the essence of really the paradigm shift that the entire world is going through. This is just another part of the same shift. Brazil's going through a societal upheaval. Venezuela's going through an upheaval. To an extent, Argentina and Chile have already begun to do that. Even Mexico is. Certainly parts of Europe. Oceania, you see Australia. The political leadership, they're saying, maybe we want to reverse parts of our gun control because it's becoming a problem. Maybe we want to become more insular from, people who are investing and buying up swaths of this country. Maybe we want to take South African white refugees, they considered, and I guess apparently still are. South Africa is another great example, total social upheaval there. And it's a silent upheaval in a lot of cases. What you've got right now is that the neoliberals are seeking to control Europe and the United States and Canada especially. In order to do that, they can't let people in those countries know too much about what's going on right now in the third world. If people knew that there was a silent encroaching genocide going on in South Africa and that the group being targeted was of European diaspora, if they knew that Brazil was in upheaval and that they might end up with a legitimate right-wing government after decades of nonstop leftism, if they knew that the opposition in Venezuela that's often cast off by their sacred savior Maduro is far right but really isn't and represents a larger paradigm shift and problem within Venezuelan society, then people would start to think, oh, well, so this is not a race thing. Oh, the new right has nothing to do with race. It's basically a pan-populism rising up in all sorts of parts of the world with attendant backlash from the far left. Again, van der Bellen. Going to be quite similar to a far leftist, a Green Party member in Brazil. Going to be rather similar to fringe parts of the ANC within South African politics. It's going to be similar to multiple opponents of the establishment maybe of Australia. It's happening all over the world. Japan's having political upheaval. China's having political changes. Look at what Xi has done. He's now president for life. China's now a dictatorship. You just didn't really hear much about it because they don't want to let you know that these political and social shifts, the overhaul of the whole world structure, is going on everywhere. Even Putin, in a way, represents that. He didn't even have any opponent. He's basically become a de facto dictator at the moment. He's an old man, so eventually you'll have to handpick a successor. It'll probably be someone who is from the KGB. Probably will. By the way, Putin has been making the same facial expression since he was a little kid. If you ever look at pictures of him from his childhood, he looks astonishingly similar. Some people, they get older, they change a lot. He's not one of them. But yeah, Brazilian politics is undergoing a bit of a shift. We have to wait and see what happens. So will they stay far left, or will this potentially imprisoned right-wing candidate actually manage to clinch it? Who knows? I'm not sure. I can't read in Portuguese so well, so I'm not sure exactly what the polling results are at the moment. Maybe some people from Brazil can let me know a bit more about the situation there, because it sounds like it's quite heated. When their legal system is threatening to imprison or at least fine somebody for significant sum who's in second place in their presidential election, when they've already jailed another person who would have potentially been the front runner, it seems a little bit odd to me. That's about all. Peace out.